Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to assume that might be our cue that we're ready to go, but if anyone on staff needs another minute, just holler and we can hold off. There are certain advantages and disadvantages to wholly virtual meetings, and I don't have to get the room settled down. So looks like we have good participation from council members online. So didn't see any hands from staff. I'm happy to get us started here today. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Cimino. I'm the current council chair. We are ready to begin our February virtual only Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council meeting. We're going to get started with the river herring and shad bycatch risk prediction project update. We have Dr. Janet Nye and Caitlin Wade from the University of North Carolina Institute of Marine Sciences with us, hopefully. I don't know if anyone from staff wants to kick this off, or we'll go directly to Caitlin.
This is Jason. Yeah, I mean, I can just give a little quick background. This is one of, I think, maybe 8 of the Inflation Reduction Act projects. And so, the river herring bycatch has been kind of a long-standing issue for the council. It seemed there were 2 projects that there was kind of an initial funding round, and this was one of those initial projects that we knew there was an initial study done that showed some promise here. So this project is kind of extending that work. There's some initial results that are currently being kind of made available to the fishery. We've kind of done a bit of a slow rollout on that, and we'll ramp up advertising kind of it. And so there's kind of an initial version of it, and Caitlin will describe that they have plans for kind of taking input from fishermen and also building on the model itself this year. So it's kind of a 2026 and then 2027, we there are likely to be some modifications. So that's just a little bit of background. And Caitlin, you can go ahead and share your screen again and kind of introduce yourselves and kick off. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Jason, for the intro. So hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin. I'm a first-year PhD student at UNC working with Janet Nye on looking at river herring avoidance in Atlantic herring and Atlantic mackerel fisheries. But first, thank you for inviting me to speak, and hopefully we can get some good information out of this. And so right now we are working on a river herring avoidance program forecast, or RAPcast. And RAPcast is just a weekly forecast of the distribution of river herring, Atlantic herring, and Atlantic mackerel. And I update these forecasts every week or every Monday for the following Saturday through Friday. So approximately 6 to 13 days in advance. These maps show the probability of encountering a species, so the presence and absence of them. And then the grid cells, which in the map, and it might be hard to see here, but the grid cells or black dots are about 130 kilometers squared, and that's the spatial scale we're looking at. The model background going into these forecasts are binomial generalized additive models, or GAMs, and we created them for each species separately using the Northeastern Fisheries Science Center spring, fall, summer, and winter bottom trawl surveys. The environmental variables we're currently using include sea surface temperature, Julian day, which just is the day of year, curvature and slope as just the seafloor features, and then our spatial data, latitude and longitude. And all of these variables can be forecasted to novel environments or a week ahead into the future. The time series we're currently using for Atlantic mackerel is the full time series of about 1963 to 2024. And this is just because out of the 3 species, Atlantic mackerel is the most data limited. And when we reduced the time series, the model actually did a poor job at predicting where those species are, and the accuracy went down. And so we're sticking with the full time series. But for Atlantic herring and river herring, they actually had a higher accuracy in predicting the presence and absence when we reduced the time series to 2000 to 2024. And then our forecasting we're using that as the day of year, so Julian day, and also sea surface temperature. And we're getting those sea surface temperature predictions from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, or ECMWF model. And so there's been other work at trying to reduce river herring in these fisheries, as well as just understanding the overlap of these species. And we're hoping that my work builds off of that. And so the first work was done by Bethany et al. The goal was to help reduce bycatch without reducing economic costs to the targeted fisheries. And it was started in the winter of 2011 off the coast of New Jersey, but it expanded to a larger area as more fishermen got involved. And they provided near real-time bycatch information systems by sampling vessel catch at ports, as well as increasing the amount of observers on boats. And this gave near real time, so not forecasted, but they were over time able to give seasonal predictions, and they would immediately update the fishermen when river herring was caught. The fishermen also worked with the scientists in creating a good spatial scale, and that's the same spatial scale that we are using in our current models as well. And the maps that they kind of provided to fishermen are on the screen here. And so they had kind of a stoplight green, meaning you probably won't find river herring bycatch, yellow being there's a possibility, and then red, they suggested to avoid these areas until they thought the river herring bycatch decreased. The next work was done by Turner et al., and she focused on understanding if we could predict where these species are and their migration patterns based off environmental variables. And so the goal was to understand if environmental conditions could be associated with bycatch. And they found that environmental gradients do influence the distributions and overlap among species. And so in the figure on the bottom of the screen, the first map, which is kind of small, but it's just the presence and absence of the alewife and Atlantic mackerel, and from the bottom trough surveys of NOAA. And then they were able to use this data to create predictions of where bycatch might be in the Atlantic mackerel fishery. Overall, they were able to predict 66 to 77% of observations for river herring, 68 to 72% for Atlantic herring, and 57 to 69% in Atlantic mackerel, which is very encouraging and means that it is possible to possibly create a tool to reduce bycatch, informing the models of environmental variables. And then Robert et al. Took this another step further in seeing if we could forecast those environmental variables using temperature. The goal ultimately was to help fisheries avoid river herring bycatch and maximize their catch limits for targeted species, and to see if forecasting was even an option and showed any accurate results. And so this study, they created an environmental forecast of a week or two that predicted the co-occurrence of river herring with Atlantic herring or Atlantic mackerel. And ultimately, they found that it was possible on a 1 to 2 week time scale. And so the first figure here at the bottom just shows the difference in distributions of the species week by week. And so they found that around 1 to 2 weeks had the least amount of uncertainty and most accuracy. And they also found a clear seasonal effect on forecasted bycatch risk, especially in the winter and spring. And so just some seasonal differences are in these small maps on the top right. And so you can see that the overlap of these species changes throughout the year depending on their migration patterns. And so static management might not be as helpful in reducing river herring bycatch. And so with all of that past information, we took that a step further and made some improvements. And so we are currently forecasting the bycatch starting around 6 or 7 days advance and never going past 2 weeks. Turner et al. Tried to do 1 to 2 days in advance and had very limited success, but their model had a hard time finding the presences of the species, as well as there was a lot of data limitations and problems. And it also covers a larger spatial scale compared to past reduction programs. So we're starting with most of the Atlantic coast, including the Gulf of Maine, Georgia's Banks, southern New England, and the Mid-Atlantic Bight areas. Our model also does a really good job at predicting presences and absences of the two species, which means that each week it's able to find areas that most likely have the species and not just being able to predict one over the other. And then we were also able to improve the forecast models. So the ECMWF models has improved in the past year. So we were able to use those improved forecast models as well as include spatial and temporal data into our GAN model and update the data from the Roberts et al. Study. We also again decided to model each species separately right now just to maximize the amount of information and data going into the model. And our explained deviance, which is the second column here on the table, shows that river herring had a 51% explained deviance, Atlantic herring had a 45 explained deviance.
Whatever, make me whatever.
And Atlantic mackerel had a 29% explained deviance. And so what that means is that the model is able to predict 51% of the total population, and that those limitations could just be that the species is limited due to abundance, and so they're not fulfilling their full spatial area, or we're not including all of the environmental variables or factors that could be limiting or changing their distributions. Compared to Roberts et al., which again did the co-occurrence between Atlantic herring and river herring, they had a lower explained deviance of 18.7%, as well as Turner et al., who did individual species, also had a lower explained deviance. So we see an improvement from there, as well as our correct amount of presences and absences we're able to see in the model. And so I took 19 dates throughout the time series that either had a large amount of river herring bycatch recorded or just was sprinkled out the time series so I could look at each month individually. I then forecasted to those dates by a week and compared it with the observer data. And overall, Atlantic herring had an 85% success rate in correctly predicting the presences of Atlantic herring. River herring was 62%, and then Atlantic mackerel was 47%. And then for absences for all three species, the model was able to predict about 60% correctly. This is an improvement from, again, the Roberts et al. Model, as well as past reduction programs, just looking at a limited amount of dates itself. And so before getting too much into our outputs and maps, our main map that we created was a joint distribution. And those came from looking at the two individual species, our bycatch species of river herring and the targeted species, Atlantic herring in this case, but also Atlantic mackerel. And so these two maps here are individual probability of encounter. And so for each one, the blue means that species is most likely to be there or be present. And then the red areas represents areas where the species has a high likelihood of being absent. As you can see with river herring and Atlantic herring for this particular week, the model predicts a high overlap. And so when we are able to pair the two maps and create a joint distribution map, which is this bigger map in the middle here, we see that there's not much area where river herring and Atlantic herring might not overlap. But the goal is that this blue area or light blue area is the best area to maximize the Atlantic herring catch while minimizing the encounter rate for river herring. The red areas on this map then also are either that Atlantic herring has a low probability of being encountered, so most likely to be absent, or river herring has a high probability of being present there. And so with these models, we created a website known as Rapcast. This QR code will take you there, but I just wanted to show you the website themselves. So hopefully now you can see the Rapcast website. And the first thing that you encounter as you scroll down is just a instructional video of all the information that the website has, as well as how to interpret each of the maps. And so these maps that I'm about to show you were actually updated yesterday, and they forecast the presence or absence of these species from February 14th to February 20th. And so the first one is the joint distribution between Atlantic herring and river herring. These maps are interactive, and so you can zoom into whatever area you're most interested in. Again, the blue areas are places that maximize Atlantic herring encounters while minimizing the river herring encounters. And these red areas represents where Atlantic herring might be absent or river herring might have a high probability of encountering. You can also press on individual grid cells to get the exact probability. And so for this one, it is very low, which means that river herring could be encountering this space or Atlantic herring is absent. In the bottom left hand, you can also see your latitude and longitude based off where your mouse is. And if you wanted to get a bigger view of the photo, you can open the full map, and so it just gives a larger picture. The second map is then the same joint probability, but with Atlantic mackerel instead of Atlantic herring. And so this week it predicts the best area to encounter Atlantic mackerel while minimizing your river herring encounter is in the Mid-Atlantic Bight in southern New England, kind of offshore. I've also included all the individual maps if you just care at looking at one of the species or want to look at how we get the joint distribution in these tabs here. And so this is the individual map for river herring. And so the model finds that the environmental variables are conditioned right, or that river herring might be along the majority of the coast. The individual species for Atlantic herring overlaps quite a bit with river herring, except in the Gulf of Maine and Georges Bank areas. And then I also have the individual map for Atlantic mackerel. And right now the model is predicting that they are can be found or most likely to be present in the southern New England or mid-Atlantic Bight area. At the bottom of the screen, I also have questions that anybody accessing the maps or website can answer anonymously about if the forecasts look accurate, if they have any feedback on how to make the maps look better, or anything in general. Everyone can also always email me, but this is just in case somebody wants to remain anonymous. I've also have these two links. One is to get the PDF version of all these maps that aren't interactive, as well as just some background information on the decisions going into making these RAPcast models in general. Scrolling back up to the top, I also have all the past forecasts in this tab here. And so if you're interested to know what the model says on the probability of any of these species for this week or last week or even last month, this will all be stored here. And so you just click on the dates that you're most interested in, and all the maps that I just showed you are here for that individual week. And so over time, as this year progresses, we'll be able to look at the seasonal changes and how these maps change on a weekly basis if they do. So going back to the presentation and looking at our future steps. So we have already had a lot of successful meetings and conversations with fishermen on how to create an accessible website and maps that will be beneficial information to them. And we're hoping to continue this work, especially as we're able to get more data and improve the model and incorporate some of their suggestions. But our ultimate goal right now is to create an accessible website that is easy to use and is not confusing in any way and actually provides information that might be helpful in the decision-making process. Our second step right now is to evaluate how our base model or the maps that I just showed you are doing and tracking the species distribution. And this is going to be based on observer data, but also fishermen feedback and the mental maps that they already have. And then we're also planning on creating a more improved model that is a multi-species spatial temporal model. So instead of having individual models for each species, combining them into one model to improve how much data is going in. We're also planning on broadening the surveys used, so not just the NOAA bottom trough surveys, but also incorporating other surveys, as well as estimating the abundance of species in particular areas and not just the presence and absence. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions now, or you're always welcome to email me at kjwade@unc.edu. And I also just have the QR code that should take you to the website as well. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And thank you again for allowing me to share my work.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate that. So I'll look to council members first. Any questions on the presentation? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands from council members. That's always a sign that it was a job well done, Caitlin. Very thorough. Hang on, maybe we did. No, I think we had a hand up now. There we go. Jim Gilmore, did you have a question?
Yeah, Joe, sorry, my raised hand thing's a little better. Yeah, just a couple of questions on our question on the validation of it, or the ground truth, I guess water truthing of it. So right now it looks like you're getting feedback from the website, and just wondering how well that's actually working. And secondly, I guess the observers would know the way to do it, but is there other ways of ground truthing? I mean, it sounds like a great tool, but I was just wondering how much you can validate that it's actually working beyond what, those couple of things. Thanks.
Yes. So we have heard from some fishermen on if the maps look accurate. Right now, since we just started this, we don't have a ton of information right now, but I'm hoping to get more fishermen involved to get their feedback. And so that's one tool. The observer data is also really helpful just because we know the exact location, and has been helpful in just ground truthing and just doing a little sanity check on my models. The other way that we currently are checking the models in general is through cross-validation and some other diagnostic tools. So basically what cross-validation does is take out part of the model info or data and uses it as a test. And so we use the training data, which is about 70% of the bottom trough surveys in the NOAA study, and then we test it with the remaining 30%. But I'm hoping as time goes on and getting more fishermen feedback, as well as that now that we're forecasting the model, we can use observer data this year to look at how well the base model is doing. And that will also show us how well a new model is. And so we're making sure we're looking every step of the way, validating to make sure we're giving the best and most accurate results. But right now there are limitations just with the data.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. We have a few other council members, and I would like to give the public a chance. It's important for a lot of our fisheries, so I'm going to go to Michelle Duvall next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Jim asked one of the questions that I was going to ask about feedback from the website and the amount of feedback that you've received, but then also in terms of your next steps of, engaging with fishing communities to, better validate this information. Will you be giving a presentation to the New England Fishery Management Council as well? I mean, have you identified folks yet that you would be reaching out to, specifically?
Yes, it is a work in process because the fishermen are busy and everybody's always busy, but we are working towards building those relationships. We had a workshop in Boston the last September that went well, and we got feedback from some northeastern fisheries, as well as we regularly update not just the Mid-Atlantic Council or Jason on this project, but we also update the Northeastern or Council, as well as the Atlantic States Commission, since they are also interested in the river herring bycatch. And so we are trying to reach out to all of our fishermen contacts and start building those relationships, as well as with the managers. And so I don't actually have any plans or dates to present this to the Northeastern Fishery Council, but I am working with scientists that are doing similar information, and we're always happy to give a presentation to them.
Okay, thanks. It looks like Jason might have a follow-up to that. Jason?
Yeah, just Jamie at New England Fishery Management Council. She's involved in the kind of oversight of the project. So they're definitely well aware of this, and yeah, we can ping them to see if they want some more information there. They have a plan amendment that's spinning up that is potentially looking at some of this similar environmental prediction data. It kind of got shelved for a while, and they're resurrecting it. I think some of these similar analyses, and there's been quite a bit of kind of cross back and forth to make sure on the analytical side that kind of folks know what's going on. And yeah, I think Jamie will there if they want to. Well, we can reach out to Jamie just to see if they want kind of a more formal presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. Looks like we have a couple more council hands, so I'm going to go to Bobby Rule and then Rich Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just two quick questions. One, with the continuation of this program, do you guys plan on picking up and utilizing some of the groundwork that Cooperative Research had with their river heron avoidance program they had 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago? I can't remember how long ago it was now, where we actually had Marcos within the VTRs for tow-by-tow reporting. And then it was also correlated with shoreside sampling when the vessels came in. And the other question I would have would be, it ended up being the kind of the same reason that program kind of fell by the wayside, other than budget, was it was almost impossible to rectify the issue of, yes, you could predict that river herring were in an area spatially, but not necessarily available to the herring fishery at the time, depending on how the gear was fished. This was much more of an inshore issue, but certainly viable offshore as well. It's no secret that the fish are going to be in that water in some part of the water column, but the fishery is able to actually operate clear of the river herring by either fishing above or below that band. But it was very, very difficult to quantify that with the means that we had at the last avoidance program. I just didn't know if there was something in the works to kind of tease that out in the future. Thanks.
Yes. So I'm hoping to use some of that past reduction program work. I've been in contact with Brad Schondelmeyer, and the process of getting that data, it's just a little bit tedious. And so it does take some time, which is why I wasn't able to incorporate it in this model. But I'm hoping for the improved model that we should have ready by the beginning of 2027 or maybe even the end of 2026. It does incorporate some of that data, since it is very helpful and could inform the model a lot. For the plans on, or your second question, we're hoping that it is predictive and can be used as a dynamic fishery management tool of where these fish species are, because they might be changing across years or over time. And so we're hoping to be able to tease apart those spatial and temporal distributions of those species a little bit better. One way I want to do this is kind of look back in time and see if their distributions are changing over time, as well as looking at different climate scenarios to see if in the future these distributions might be changing. As the overlap changes throughout the year, it could be changing throughout time as well. And so just trying to take a deeper look at those things, and maybe even doing some simulation studies and making sure that our model is accurately predicting what we're saying.
Okay, thanks. And I think, a lot of these questions, and I expect from the public as well, might have some process follow-ups that might be better answered by staff. So Jason, I'll just offer that when you do have some follow-up, feel free to jump in after Caitlin's done. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. And I will on that question too. Yeah. We definitely had some discussions, but just resource limitations of resurrecting the earlier SMAS bycatch avoidance work is just not feasible. And yeah, we kind of, I think, hope this is like a tool, especially maybe in the evolution of it to 2027, building in abundance data, maybe kind of narrows down some of the scale of the hotspots a bit. So again, it's like a tool in the toolbox for fishermen that, of where they're choosing to fish. And if, it gives them a little more information on, where there's likely to be overlap, then they can kind of strategize in terms of fishing, style or fine scale location. If they know it's riskier area, and maybe there's some other things they can do. And so I think the big picture is another tool in the toolbox. Given we have these bycatch caps that can close the fisheries to try to help them kind of make decisions. Another kind of bit of information as they kind of make their decisions.
And I see Janet's hand is up as well, and I'd offer the same, Janet, if you do have any contributions or questions, just feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Caitlin's wonderful presentation. It has been really helpful to have workshops and to have feedback from the fishermen. And so we have heard the gentleman's suggestion that the fishermen can maybe fish at different depths and avoid some of that river herring bycatch. We have looked at bottom temperature and surface temperature to try to get at that. We've also heard the multiplier is a big issue for them. So as I understand, they base or they estimate the bycatch based on previous tows of where they caught river herring bycatch. So without that effort by Brad and SMAST in the past, where they were trying to estimate that bycatch in real time, we now use this multiplier and try to estimate it. So Caitlin and I have been thinking about, in addition to providing the maps of where bycatch is likely to occur, to also run some simulations on, okay, if you sort of took this path, how might we be able to better estimate that multiplier, that bycatch, and how we might, be able to inform the fishermen's progression of tows or path to reduce the bycatch. So that the conversations with the fishermen are also helping us to think a little bit more creatively about how we can use these species distribution models. And so I'd encourage, if any fishermen are on the line, to please get in touch with us and let us know what you think.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Next, Rich Wong.
Great job on that presentation. And it looks really intriguing. My question is, were you able to, or are you able to integrate the observer data into these kind of forecasting models? Because it seems like that would be useful, or even fishery landings data, over space and time.
Yes, thank you. So with these current models I have now, I am unable to, but the model I'm working towards right now can include multiple data sources. And so I haven't teased apart exactly how I'm going to include fishery dependent data and fishery independent data, as well as the different spatial scales and gear types yet. But I do know that it is possible and it has been done before. And so I'm working with scientists who have worked on similar models before, so just to make sure I'm doing everything correctly. But yes, we should be able to in the new approved model.
Jose, did you have a follow-up?
No, but I had a question regarding the model evaluation, but I can just wait until the council members ask their questions, unless you want me to go now.
Well, we'll put you in the queue. We have one more so far, so I'll let Todd Janeski go, and then we'll go to you.
Thank you very much. Just kind of want to clarify a little bit. I appreciate the presentation and the discussion around this, but as I'm looking at the table and the percentages of presence at 47% for mackerel versus 60 or 85% respectively for herring, which we don't manage, seems to be, while it's a good tool in the toolbox, Jason, I think you're right. I'm a little bit skeptical right now that a less than 50% success rate, if we're managing a species, if that's enough of a level of confidence for our industry to actually go and pursue those species. I think right now, I appreciate the work that's being done. I'd like to see a little bit more work that's to be done before we make decisions that less than 50% is used as our point of reference with this. So can maybe if I'm hoping we're going to head in that sort of direction and not just simply adopt any sort of this as the beginning of a direction that we're headed in.
Yes, of course. So I will say that those percentages are higher than past work, which was exciting that we were able to improve upon. And so, if anything, we're heading into a good direction with this work. Also, I will say those correction percentages, these are schooling fish. And so the environmental variables are just finding areas that look to be the right condition that these species might be there. And it gives kind of a uniform condition. And so if the temperature, so they are not throughout the entire area as one of these maps, because they're just going to be distributed throughout. And it's hard to get at that spatial scale. We will see how best the model does with that as we improve it. The other thing is that, again, yeah, as we improve the model, we hope that those percentages will also improve. But right now, they're just on 19 particular dates throughout 2000 to 2024. And so it's not a large amount of observer data that we're using just to check the model. And so if we looked at more observer data or did simulation studies, that actually might be improved. And when I do a cross-validation of these models, it's actually a lot higher of percentages. It's around 70 to 80%. So it's a lot better. But it's just hard to get across that right now. But as we're getting real-time observer data and real-time information from fishermen, we will better be able to know if these models are acceptable and improve upon them. As well as, again, they are just to be a tool in the toolbox. And so they will always have some limitations, but hopefully it can help fishermen in their decision process, especially as these species move around in just a dynamic way of thinking about where that bycatch might be occurring.
Okay, thank you. Jose, you're up, and then we'll go to the public.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a quick question regarding the model evaluation. I was wondering if you have considered machine learning, like putting cameras on board to assess the composition of the catch. Perhaps this is not possible given the high volume of the fishery and the way it operates, but I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
Yeah, that probably would be very helpful. We are trying to use pre-existing data, and so we're not actually going out collecting data ourselves. And this way, we're just trying to use what's already out there. And if we're able to establish a model using pre-existing data, then this model can carry on without much effort or manpower in the future. But validation techniques like putting a camera on boats and stuff would be helpful and add more information. But we are focusing on using pre-existing data, so what's already out there, to model these species.
Mr. Chair, okay if I ask a quick follow-up to Todd?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Todd, was your concern more like on the level of, just making sure we caveat our kind of confidence appropriately, even just as a tool in the toolbox, or was your concern more on the level of, proceeding down some management action based on this? So this hasn't been like a management action kind of kind of tie-in project from the get-go. It's really just been more an informational thing. So I was just trying to kind of tease out what the nature of your question was, more on just the science thing or a caution about tying it to management versus informational.
Thanks, Jason. It's a little both. It's certainly the front end, right? I just want us to have a caveat that this is preliminary. It is based on 19 observations, and right now that confidence interval is pretty low. As we begin to utilize, models like this for management decisions in the future, what I'm hoping is they're going to be a little more robust. Obviously, we all want better science to inform our decision making. So it's a little both forward looking, Jason, but right now for the primary, it's a big caveat of this is a good start, but I guess I'm not confident in a 47 versus an 85. And if it's a tool and I'm a fisherman on a boat making a management of a where am I going to steam decision, that's not a lot of confidence for me that, well, maybe I might catch something less than 50% chance. So that's why I kind of say it's a little both. But right now, let's just look at it as a current level caveat for love to see more information and more research on that.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks for that clarification.
Okay. Well, thank you, council members and staff. I think that was very beneficial to an already very good presentation. We have at least one hand up from the public. Megan, you've had your hand up for a while, so we'll go to Megan Lapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yep, sound good.
Great. Megan Lapp, Fisheries. Yeah, I have a question, and I would just like to preface that with saying, thank you, Caitlin, for your presentation. And I know that we have spoken via email in the past about some of the model predictions, and I've shared with you some very serious concerns that it predicts fish where there's not fish, or sometimes does not predict fish where there are fish. So I do want to just echo the previous concern of a 47% chance of accurate prediction of presence of mackerel. If our boats had to, operate like that, we would be bankrupt if that was our success rate. So, but I do have a question, Caitlin. Can you put that back up, the picture where you had the overlap with the herring, the two charts?
Or this one?
Yeah, that. Yep. Thank you. Are you going to be able to also put management areas on these charts? I think it's important for people, on the council to understand that, for example, the picture in the middle where it's, you're trying to look at that blue area and say, oh, this is the area where there should be herring, but not river herring. People should fish there. That is for herring, Atlantic herring in particular, which is what this is about here. That's a particular management area that has its own set quota, and small mesh bottom trawl vessels are not allowed to fish there because there are gear restrictions. And I think that, for council members to understand what is plausible and what is not plausible, the management regulations areas, gear restricted areas, things like that also have to be on these charts, because I think people can misunderstand and say, oh, this is a potential for people where it's really not because of other regulatory overlap. So is it possible to kind of implement those as well into discussions?
Yeah, so I do have the management areas in general of Atlantic herring that I'm hoping to incorporate into the maps. I've reached out to fishermen just to get their feedback on making sure they can see the management areas clearly, and it's not too loud or overlapping. And so I'm in the process of incorporating those. For restriction areas, since in other restrictions, I decided to leave those off of the maps just because I don't want my maps to be the source of getting all the regulations information, because I'm not involved in that process, and I don't want to say the wrong thing or accidentally put the wrong management area up there, as well as it is gear specific and sometimes time specific too. And so it might not be relevant to everybody. But general management areas I am working on, and I think will be beneficial for fishermen and other people just to orient themselves where the locations are and everything.
Thank you.
Okay, I see one more hand. Jim Fletcher.
James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association. Have you ever considered working with the people that build sonars and the fishermen that use sonars, that the identification of the species and the fish finders would help them separate rather than going through all this area where it is? In other words, getting the equipment more fine-tuned to identify the species so the captain can haul back or turn to avoid it if the two species are together. Because most of the time they're in the same area, but the schools are not the same. Thank you.
Hey, that would be very interesting. We are not currently thinking at that level, but it would be interesting if someone would be able to do that. I don't know much about it yet to know if it's possible or not.
Caitlin, maybe I'll send you a lifeline. The New York DEC is funding an offshore monitoring project where they do acoustic surveys off of Long Island in the coastal ocean. And so it's possible, with some of that data, we could figure out, what the acoustic signal of these different species are, with maybe a more concerted effort for that particular project. But that's not
Perfect,
something Caitlin and I do.
Well, it looks like we had one more hand to add to that response. So, John Hare, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. And a wonderful presentation, Caitlin and Janet. It's exciting to see this work moving forward. To answer your question, Mr. Fletcher, Northeast Fisheries Science Center has been sort of in active planning stages with the Atlantic mackerel fishery about doing exactly what you suggest, using the acoustics on the Atlantic mackerel boats, verifying the acoustic signatures to differentiate Atlantic mackerel from other species, and then working directly with industry on this problem and other problems related to the science to support Atlantic mackerel. And we would be looking to potentially extend that to Atlantic herring as well.
Ryan Raber for Vidian. I can't raise a hand. I'm on a telephone.
Okay, understood. Well, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Raber. I operate the fishing vessel Pervidian. We're a midwater trawler and a purse seiner for herring and mackerel. And I kind of wanted to give a little bit of some perspective on what we're up against with this river herring. If we wanted to catch our entire quota in 521, the rate of bycatch would be like single fish in a test basket. We take a 10 sample basket, 100-pound basket, and you're looking for 1 or 2 fish maximum. That would be a very high bycatch rate. So it's really difficult for us to even comprehend what our bycatch is because it's such a small, minuscule amount. So it's really important for us to be able to get the multiplier number from the observers from other boats. And since the FMAS program shut down, we lost the funding as of quotas and whatnot, we've been working together as a fleet, talking to each other from wheelhouse to wheelhouse, but it's a pretty scientific thing to get the number correct. Like you can't just look in the box and go, oh, geez, there's a lot of river herring here. It's such a small amount, you can't really detect it without doing, like an observer going through the samples and, actually doing, a couple hours of work to pick out this number. There's a lot of zeros in front of the number. It's like 0.0008. It would be like a good multiplier, some 0.0s, maybe 2 zeros. Anyhow, it's a very small amount of fish we're trying to look at here. So from our point of view in the wheelhouse, the most important thing is getting that multiplier number from the observers as quickly as possible. That's really the only tool we have to be able to control what we're doing. And what Brad would do is have that number and then say, okay, at this number, you can catch 400 more tons, you guys are shut down. Or, oh, you can harvest 4,000 more tons. You know, it's a moving number based on our quota too. So that is the most useful thing. What we feel is the most useful tool is being able to get access to that multiplier number. And like this year on the Cape, we were working well with the other boats. There's only 4 companies left, but we were working well with them. But again, it's hard for the captains to have a good sense of what that multiplier is. And it took, many weeks before we actually got the number. I think we got it 2 weeks ago. And the fishery's been closed for a long time, so it really doesn't help us. But that would be, from our point of view, the most important thing we could add to this program is getting back to that system like we had with Brad, the real-time multiplier, and how much quota we can harvest with that multiplier. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate those comments as well. I'll look to the presenters or to staff if there's any last follow-up.
I'll follow up with him because I want to tease out like the exact temporal and extent of scale, like the ratio on his boat for that trip or whatever. And so I'll follow up with you, Ryan. We can like talk to the observer program folks to see if I don't know if there's a way to facilitate more rapid transmission of that data, but I'll follow up and we can have some discussion there and see if there's anything we can do.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you to the presenters. That was a great start to our meeting. I'm glad everybody woke up and we did get some questions in. I think that was a very helpful additional component to the work that was already done so far. I think we all look forward to seeing more of this. With that, we can go to our next agenda item. I know we're running a little bit late, but Jason's got the next few items and it's nothing he isn't familiar with, asking him to make up some time for us. So we have, next step would be the introduction of the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization Illex quota issue. Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you. Just 1 minute to get PowerPoint up here. Okay. You can see my presentation up on the screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, Dr. Paul Rago is gonna give a bit of a history or a bit of a recap of the SSC's ABC determination as part of it. So I'm gonna tag off to him in a few slides. But for this presentation, we have this implementation plan topic for 2026. So just trying to kind of summarize and remind folks of how did we get to our current U.S. Illex quota? Where did the NAFO quota come from? This project's kind of contemplates tapping into. Just recap the proposal and then kind of describe the initial steps that are proposed to kind of kick this off. And NAFO is the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization, manages some Canadian international waters. So current Illex quota, just kind of reminding folks of the high variability that we see, I may have said quota, but landings, the high variability we see with Illex landings over time. The orange highlight is the foreign fishery. And then outside of that, may have been some JV, but then we had the domestication of the fishery. And really, again, this fishery has tremendous variability year to year. So the last year on this is 2023. just the last couple years, 24 and 25. 24 here in orange was a relatively low year. 25 was pretty good. It was the fishery kind of started, fairly early and went fairly late, and we really see a variety of kind of performance in terms of the magnitude, when it starts, when it ends. If you look kind of at the temporal variability, again, both year to year and within a year, it's just tremendous amounts of variability. So the current ABC is 40,000 metric tons. It was set by the SSC in 22 and kind of revisited in 23 and maintained. And really, and Paul will provide a little more detail, but they looked at likely kind of risk profiles of either the fishing mortality being more than 2/3 of the natural mortality, fairly low. The risk for less than 50% escapement, fairly low. Risk for less than 40% escapement, fairly low. I think the SSC may have characterized some of those as moderate, but again, from my perspective, pretty reasonable risks there compared to other risks that are tolerated by the council for overfishing. So and Paul will go into a bit of detail on that 40,000, but we start with that 40,000 ABC from the SSC, take a bit out for discards, and that's kind of where we're at with our current quota. So Paul, if you just want to say next as you go through, as we kind of just kind of summarize the SSC's findings from last year of kind of reconfirming that 40,000 metric tons ABC was extended, and Paul will kind of summarize the SSC's findings when it decided to extend and maintain that ABC.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Assume you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to sort of comment on this process here. It's a difficult species to assess. It lives less than a year and spawns once and dies. And most importantly, it spends most of its life cycle offshore, off the continental shelf. There's a short fishing season. As you saw in the earlier slide, and as you know, the stock and the fishery starts after the spring survey of National Marine Fisheries Service, and is pretty much winding down when the fall survey is occurring. So it's pretty much, their abundance is sort of in between the points in which we can monitor it well. It's strongly influenced by oceanography. It's an open population. It's basically like watching a parade through your basement window. You see parts of it, but not all of it. And it's we have not been successful in the research track assessment or in other venues to get what we call an analytic model, that is a time series model between points. But we did assemble a lot of information from biologists, oceanographers, modelers, and perhaps most importantly, the fishermen who participated along the way. Next slide, please. So we developed, for lack of a better word, an envelope process, and it looks at the key sources of uncertainty. The first of which I mentioned earlier is availability. What fraction of the stock is actually on the shelf? What is the efficiency of the survey net? We call that catchability. And then the natural mortality rate, that's largely a function of what we think the maximum age is for the population. And then finally, how well do we estimate abundance? That is, what's the standard error of the abundance estimates we get from the survey? So there was a lot of collaboration to sort of refine these estimates into plausible ranges. So next slide, please. What do we do with those plausible ranges? The first thing is to take them and to look for an envelope, or do we want to envelop the range of the simultaneous variation of all those key inputs? So we look at a time series of historical biomass estimates from the fall survey and the series of catches. Now we use a very simple model to estimate what population was needed to support what we see at the end of the series. So yes, we have an endpoint, we know the catch that occurred, and we can use that to extrapolate what the size of the population was. So, and then we take that same estimate and look forward and say, okay, if that fishery did not exist, then what would the size of the terminal year population be? So this is essentially what we call an escapement ratio. You say it's for simple example, if the biomass at the end of the series was 10 and based on the catch, you estimate the estimate at the start of the series was 100. Then if you took the fishery out, what would the terminal year have been? So it's a theoretical concept that says, okay, what would have happened had you not had the fishery present? So the way we examine it is to look at all possible outcomes or combinations of these input variables. And so from that, we can compute the probabilities of bad outcomes with respect to what we call escapement, and then also the ratio of fishing mortality to natural mortality. So that ratio is oftentimes used for, or has been used for, prey species or small pelagic species. So we look at it in two ways. One is to evaluate the historical catches and see if any of those prove to be problematic. And then the alternative is to do what the economists call the counterfactual alternative, which is to say, look at the possibility of alternative future catches and how they would have affected what we saw in the past. And then finally, we did a little bit of work to link it to the risk policy. Next slide, please. Okay, so the SSC reviewed this material. For the sake of full disclosure, I presented the material. I was not a part of the process by which these conclusions were derived or concluded. So the SSC said that although you looked at a wide range of parameters, there are additional uncertainties yet to be evaluated. The terminal year assessment value in 2024 was about 90,000 metric tons, and that was the lowest in the time series, second lowest in the time series. But one of the important points is that the biomass, the exploitation, and the escapement rates have really varied without trend. So that's an important consideration. Over the time series, escapement has generally been high, over 73%. And this suggests that there's a relatively small impact of the fishery on the exploited stock components. The other piece of information is related to the estimated weekly fishing mortality rates. And again, those are very low overall. It's not possible yet to know exactly where the stock size is, but all of the evidence suggests that we're closer to BMSY than we are to half BMSY. So the general statement is, compared to fisheries for squid elsewhere around the globe, the ABC levels are associated with a low risk of exceeding those escapement standards. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so the SSC recommended continuing the 40,000 metric tons. They highlighted that there was a low chance of falling below the escapement level, and that of 40%. That's used in a number of squid fisheries. There's at least 4 species which use around the world which use this standard, including Illex argentinus, which is a very large fishery. There's a moderate risk of exceeding that F/M ratio of 2/3. So there was a general consensus that the ABC will lead to a low risk of overfishing. But perhaps a sticking point was one of the conclusions was that increasing the ABC beyond this level was not justified due to lack of a clear link between escapement, the F/M ratio, and the risk of overfishing. So this will be an important part of future deliberations as the SSC addresses this the topic again. There's not been a formal adoption of the reference points nor a formal application of the council's risk policy. And then finally, in terms of sources of uncertainty, next slide, please. Again, there's this lack of a peer-reviewed OFL and its effect on uncertainty. The reference points have not been evaluated for Illex ilcibrosis. There is interannual variability in the fraction of squid that is subject to exploitation. I mean, the work of the Squid Squad and others and the fishermen that participate in it, the oceanographers, highlight this oceanographic influence and its the sequence of good and bad years. And so we think that the levels of escapement are generally poorly understood, and both analytically and empirically. And one of the potential reasons is that the stock has been, for all intensive purposes, been lightly exploited. And then, we haven't really taken into account some of the other types of factors such as gear selectivity and so forth. So that concludes my remarks, and I turn it back to you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, for running through that. It's super helpful. Okay, so there's kind of some background of how and why we're at the current U.S. quota, which has not been caught since its last increase. So on to the NAFO quota. And Paul, you may still be unmuted. I'm not sure, but just double check.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so where did the current NAFO quota come from? And so we looked at this back maybe 5 years ago with some of the initial squid work around the time of that research track and just before that. So 1979 NAFO Illex landings were about 162,000 metric tons. And then in subsequent assessments, they said, okay, the 1979 survey index was quite high. The survey index up in that area. From 83 to 97, its average was 2.94. And so they just took 2.94 divided by 14.2, and that comes out to 0.207. So they said, okay, the 83 to 97 average is about 1/5 of their survey index in that big 1979 landings year. So they said, okay, they take, about 1/5 of the landings in 79. That was 33,000 and change. They rounded that up to 34,000 metric tons. And there actually was some revisions to some data, but they've just left it at 34. So that current NAFO quota is primarily based on 1979 landings amount, the 1979 survey up in that area, and then the average of the 1983 to 1997 surveys. So that 34,000 metric tons quota, from my perspective, is based on some pretty old data and we've struggled with Illex in the U.S. ourselves of how to drive a quota, but a bit of a kind of interesting formulation from my perspective, and kind of complicated and kind of uncertain, or it must be, I mean, quite uncertain. But they had to do something, so this is what they did. From their 2022 assessment, I just dug out a few notes from it. They noted that some of the most recent indices at that point were low, and maybe that their stock has returned to a low productivity state. They kind of keep flagging, like kind of we do, that you've got this short lifespan, variable recruitment, so it's not even clear that the assessment, even based on that old data, well, even if the assessment was based on fresher data, it's not clear that even would reflect the stock conditions for the upcoming 3 years, even if it had been based on recent data, which it's not. Then they have the 2-year time lag between the data and the assessment anyway, and just general concerns about trying to come up with reference points for this, which they want to try to work on. So again, they're just kind of highlighting their uncertainty, as kind of Paul highlighted our uncertainty. I just grabbed from our last management track assessment that stock area 3 and 4 has or sub areas 3 and 4. That's the Canadian landings there, or the NAFO landings. So they did pop in 21. They're pretty low in 22, 3, and 4. Okay, so just again a little background on how we got to the U.S. quota, how NAFO got to its quota. So the proposal is to examine and consider an approach to making an in-season adjustment to the U.S. Illex squid quota when 2 specific criteria are met, and what those 2 are exactly would be to be developed. But basically, if you have some percentage of the U.S. quota has been reached, so there's some decent productivity on the U.S. side, and if the NAFO quota is below a certain percentage, i.e. the NAFO landings don't appear to be taking much of its quota, then does it make sense to kind of try to absorb some of that NAFO quota into the U.S. quota? If we look productive and they don't look like they're going to take much of theirs, then the proposal is to develop an approach to allow us to kind of have an in-season adjustment to utilize some of that quota. But the staff kind of conclusion, if you kind of saw in the when we looked at this in 2020, was like, given how that NAFO quota is constructed, it's not really clear, or it hasn't been clear to staff, that the NAFO quota is really relevant to the U.S. productivity and risk of overfishing, and we haven't caught our currently higher quota. So given some of those concerns last time this was thought about, and kind of just doing a recap on the US ABC and the NAFO quota, staff is recommending, and there's been some kind of preliminary discussions of bringing this maybe to the SSC in March as a first step, of kind of a similar intro for the SSC, and then some additional work. But staff recommends the council kind of seek some input from the SSC on is there kind of a biological linkage between the US ABC and the NAFO quota? What might that mean for kind of borrowing their quota in a given year if we have high production and they don't? And then once the SSC has provided that guidance, the council could kind of consider that, and consider next steps. I think staff, again, given how the 2 quotas are constructed, that seemed like a good first step to evaluate things. So that is kind of the background, introduction, and proposed kind of next steps for this particular implementation plan item. And just looking for kind of some, well, questions and discussions, and then kind of an okay from the council. This seems like a reasonable way to proceed. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. So I'll look to council members for any questions, or as Jason mentioned, happy to kind of wander into discussion since we are looking for feedback, and we'll give the public a chance as well. So to the council, any questions? I see an old council member trying to trick us. Okay, Rich Wong, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if this ground has been covered, but why is the quota being so underutilized in recent years? Thanks, Jason.
Our quota or their quota or either or both?
I was referring to our quota, but or both, if they're the same, reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's just a highly variable kind of animal, and if you look through the whole history, I mean, pretty much through the quota was pretty level through. You can see those quotas are the little dots on this figure. So I mean, most years it is underutilized. I think the kind of thing that the recent work by Paul has shown that, basically even in those high years, there were enough squid out there that we don't think that, those high years are or the high or the low years are unlikely to be kind of creating some kind of escapement problem. So, the catches up to those levels, even in the kind of the lower abundance years, don't really seem to likely to cause a problem. So it's not a problem to either achieve or underachieve the quota, I think. Paul, is that kind of a fair kind of characterization, that either, based on kind of the envelope analysis, neither underachieving nor overachieving the quota seems likely to cause a biological problem for Illex, given what we've seen so far?
Yeah, that you've characterized it well. In years in which it is underutilized, the magnitude of the fall survey still suggests that the exploitation rate was very low. So there is no, and escapement is high. So from that, you basically conclude that there was a much less of the stock available to the survey and fishing area during that particular year. Thank you.
I think we've also gotten some input, sometimes in the last couple years, they've had some real shark issues down south where the Illex have been more abundant. I think I played a video that Robert Rule had obtained maybe back in August. And I mean, it may not have been quite as many sharks as that NOAA picture that were on the dead right whale, but and it was at night, so it's hard to see. But the amount of shark activity behind this boat that I think had hoped to squid fish down there was really impressive.
Okay, Rich, did you have a follow-up? Are you good? Okay, yeah, thumbs up from Richard. So speaking of Bobby, we have Bobby Rule next, and then we'll go to Lori, and then we have at least one member of the public there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was just going to kind of try to answer Rich's question there. Jason and Paul did an excellent job of pretty much laying it out, but it really comes down, for the most part, in the last decade or so, the underutilization was more so an issue of availability. It requires a certain set of parameters. That's got to shape. The water has to shape up. You have to have eddies pull off of the Gulf Stream to come up on the bank to actually bring the product up, so it's available to the fishery. And there is a smattering of years, especially going farther back in the time series, where it was also a market issue, which, you know, there wasn't enough value in it for the fishery to be fully prosecuted. But it really is environmentally dependent. If you don't have the right scheme of water to push the way I've always kind of looked at it and tried to explain it to somebody from outside the fishery is Illex kind of like looking at a hurricane. You have a big biomass that's really broad, and the outer wisps of that, you know, circle or the eye that you're looking for on a hurricane is what actually hits the bank and comes up. And it's not so much that it comes up in the sense that, you know, they hyper aggregate. It just comes into an area where the fishery can actually take place. There's been attempts years past to try to do a midwater fishery out in the, you know, off the continental shelf, but they disperse so much in the water column that there's just there's no density to it. So it's not, at this point, it's not really considered a viable fishery. So basically what you're doing is you're kind of driving the bottom. It actually drives the product together, which is why why the fishery takes place on the edge of, you know, the continental shelf. But there's also been implications in the last decade or so that's kind of changed the footprint of that fishery as well, between the coral zones and GRAs and tilefish habitat and all that. So there has been a couple other mitigating factors that have shifted the footprint of the fishery, but ideally it comes down to an availability issue. And if the water doesn't shape up, the squid may be there, but we just can't reach it.
Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate that. Lori Nolan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just seems when we're looking at this historic fishery chart that Jason just had up and just took away, that's about 63 years worth of landings that we're looking at there. And if you look at the, I don't know, 19, 20, 21, the industry caught more fish each year. So, you know, if you look at 19, that's almost the top of all the landings in the 63 years. Then we exceed it. Each year is better. So it doesn't look that taking more fish causes a problem. You know, each year we took more fish, and yet the following year there were more to take. So while the industry isn't catching its allocation, it just seems if there's a year where we had a trend like this and the industry got shut down and there were fish out there that could have been transferred, it's sort of a proactive move at this point. But it just seems it's worth taking the steps to try to get there and have that tool in the toolbox, as we like to say, to perhaps add, you know, more fish into our quota if that's a possibility. So it seems like a good idea, and the staff, you know, lined up the steps. Jason lined up the next steps to try to make this all happen. It seems it's certainly something we should explore and try to have that available in the future. If we were to come up to a year where we actually caught ours and there were some that could become available to the industry by making this sort of transfer.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate that. Michelle Duvall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is an ignorant question, but I totally support the approach laid out by staff in terms of next steps, but I'm curious what kind of outreach this might require to NAFO at all. Any engagement there?
I probably would defer to to Garfo on that. I haven't interacted with NAFO a whole lot. What, if anything, might be needed in that regard?
Mike Bettany, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I don't think that we're not really talking about taking NAFO quota. We're not talking about fishing in NAFO, the NAFO regulatory area, where we would need to have an allocation of NAFO quota, although we do. Um, we're talking about circumstances when when the squid the population is in U.S. waters, and we want to be able to have the flexibility to provide increased opportunity for our fishermen to go catch the product that are in our waters. And I think I appreciate Jason's presentation and Dr. Rego's presentation, and I think the variability that they highlighted in the stock and where the squid are, I think is one of the reasons why we're not suggesting through a proposal like this just increasing the ABC always. I think what we're looking for is a contingency when the product, when the squid are clearly abundant and available to our fishery, like they were in those years that Lori Nolan just pointed out, 18, 19, 20, 21. How can we provide access, particularly when, the NAFO fishery is not utilizing that quota, recognizing that it is, a unit stock. And so I think that's what we're just trying to address. And it's not saying that, that NAFO wouldn't be able to fish their quota. It's just that often they're not fishing their quota. I think we have pretty good data suggesting that there are many, many years when that quota, the NAFO quota, is significantly underutilized. And that may largely be because the bulk of the stock is in U.S. waters. And so we'd like to make that available to our fishermen if possible. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that response. Yeah, and Michelle's question. I don't think it was. This is not necessarily unique, but certainly a rare management system for us in these type of set-asides. So let's see, not seeing any other council hands. So we do have a couple hands from the public. So I'd like to give some additional folks a chance here. Peter Hughes. Go ahead, Peter.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Joe, I tried to get you, but you didn't take the bait. From a fisherman's perspective, it's an episodic fishery. They're either there or they're not, or they're there in such low catch per unit of effort numbers that it doesn't make sense to go fishing. If you are a freezer trawler, maybe you can fish with a low catch per unit of effort. But when you're going out and fishing volume and you keep striking out, you just, at some point, you just stop going after them. We don't know why they're there. We don't know why they're not there. But I would like to thank, the real reason for my comments is I would like to thank National Marine Fisheries Service, the Science Center, and this council for picking this up. When the fish are there, it's a hugely important fishery for our fishermen, and being able to increase that quota based on possibly what the staff recommended would be very beneficial and provide additional opportunity for our fishermen. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. Greg DiDomenico.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Greg, you're coming through good.
Good. Just going to ask a question to Paul or to Jason. When the SSC reviews this method, if you will they be contemplating a situation where they would recommend a in-season decrease?
I would think that will depend on the nature of the request from the council. We generally try to reflect on and answer the questions that are asked. That being said, the analysis, and as others have characterized, the fishery as it has proceeded thus far, our history suggests that there's relatively little influence on the magnitude of escapement, and the process is stationary, so to speak. That is, it's unchanging over time. So, but to answer your first question, I suspect that it would be related to we would restrict our comments, or at least our answers to that, but that does not preclude consideration of the alternative.
Okay, I guess,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Did I confuse things with my last statement? I mean, we will respond to the nature of the request from the council, and address that as best as possible. Again, I will not be serving as chair on that. I will more likely be involved in some of the supporting analyses associated with this type of request. So, but from my perspective, I think that it would be restricted to the nature of the request from the council.
So to clarify, the council would have to articulate it in such a way that they would ask for our yearly OFL or ABC to be retained, regardless of the situation, with the in-season adjustment. Is that correct?
That would be my understanding. And as you know and recall, we did look at some real-time triggers, which might have been considered, and those in fact were symmetrical in the sense of considering both either decreases, status quo, or increases.
Yeah, I was very concerned about that, and that's why I'm asking the question. And I was certainly would support this. I know it sounds a little selfish, but given all of the circumstances, the life history, the fishery, etc., I would like this to be a one-way street only. I'd like not to contemplate a reduction in season. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'm not going to try and tackle that on my own, but I think if you just thinking back to RA's comments, as Mike pointed out, this isn't a request to move the ABC in a certain direction. So, we're talking about utilization within safe harvest levels. So hopefully, that is the continued direction that things go in here. So I have Eric read next, and then we'll go to Megan Ladd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You hear me all right?
Yeah, Eric, sound good.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'd like to address a couple of points. One is the quota usage, and the one thing that wasn't mentioned is the economics of the squid fishery in general. When there is no Illex inshore for the smaller boats to fish on, we have seen a good portion of that fleet go fishing for Illex in not too recent past. And when we were talking about our last Illex action, the permitting action, it turns out that the capacity of that fleet at the given high abundance rates to catch fish was about 58,000 tons. So anyway, so at this point, I really appreciate the fact that we're having this conversation. We are not talking about taking NAFO quota. And just so everybody knows, the NAFO quota, as was stated, is 34,000 tons. The U.S. portion of that quota is 453 tons. That's all we get. And nobody from the United States is going up to the Grand Banks for that. Nobody. So in order to give our fishermen the economic opportunity to make a living, whether they're abundant or not, to have this idea that a portion of the squid in that unit stock, there is evidence that squid does migrate from Canadian and NAFO waters into areas 5 and 6, which is in our zone. I think this is a really impressive and novel approach, and I hope we move forward with it. There is no harm to the resource itself, and given that the combined TAC is 74,000 tons at the moment, and there is little to no interest in anybody going fishing for Illex in the NAFO zone. And honestly, there's not a lot of interest in collecting the right science. They base their science on landings, and when nobody's fishing for it, the landings are down regardless of biomass. So I really hope that we move this forward in a timely fashion. And, you know, given the parameters that we're talking about, having access to an additional X amount of tons, 8,000, 10,000 tons, whatever it may be, I think that is a really important recognition of the ability of our fleet to catch those squid when they are available. And also, given that 2 squids are one of the most important economic drivers in the Mid-Atlantic, I think it's really important that we recognize that and make those fish available to the fleet when they're in our zone. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate the comments. Megan Lapp, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan Lapp, Fisheries. Yeah, I support the council moving forward with this action. I think it really is important, especially considering what Eric just pointed out. This is a fishery that is episodic. When the fish are available, they are available in large numbers. And what tends to happen is that fishery participants from other fisheries will jump into this fishery, and as we've seen, close the fishery and the quota early. And because the council's Illex permit amendment was disapproved by the agency, the only way that we can make sure that historic participants who don't have other options during the year to fall back on, the only way that those participants, like our boats that fish this fishery, whether it's good or whether it's not as good, the only way that we're able to take advantage of those good years of high availability is something like this being in place. So I would just really encourage the council to move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Next, I see, I see Mike Pentney's hand up. Mike, did you have a comment? Did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if Jason, if you saw my comment in the chat, I was just wondering if you could pull up the 2019 quota summary that shows the graph of the rapid landings in 2019, just as an example of why I think this is worth pursuing in this the conversation that we're having. There are years, and we've seen, Jason showed a couple of the more recent years where the catch levels have been fairly below the quota, but then there's years like 2019 where the fishery got started in early June, May, June timeframe, and by the beginning of July it was almost vertical. And the landings were coming in so quick. Each of those dots is a week. So within the span of 4 or 5 weeks, we caught 30,000 tons or 30 million pounds. And so this is the type of year where if we had a tool that allowed us, instead of closing the fishery, at the end of July, beginning of August, and shutting it down, if we had the opportunity to increase it by another, 10 million pounds, we'd, first of all, that wouldn't have been an overage. But also there would have been more, more opportunity for the fleet to bring in those squid, because they were clearly available in really high numbers that year. And there's a few years where we have it like that. And I think those are the times that we want to provide that opportunity without, without undue risk to the stock. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. We have one more hand from the public. James Fletcher, go ahead, Jim.
I'd like to thank the council for having this discussion and thank Jason for everything he's done. UNFA started this discussion about NAFO about 5 or 6 years ago, seeing a way to allow the major squid fishery to land more in a short period of time. And I hope that the council follows through and puts whatever is needed in to allow them to change the numbers when we hit the abundance of squid that we're predicting to come in the next 2 years. We may be wrong, but thank the council for at least having this discussion, and hopefully you can come up with a way to allow the quota to increase drastically. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Actually, we do have one more hand, so I'll go to Katie Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Katie Almeida, speaking for the Town Dock and Seafresh. We are in support of this idea, and we thank NIMS for bringing this forward, and we're looking forward to seeing how this progresses. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the hands I have, and we are running a bit late, but I very much appreciate all the participation from industry and all the additional comments adding to our discussion here. So with that, I'll say I have not heard anything that suggested concern, but only support for the initial steps here. So I'm going to turn it back to council and just ask if there's any objections or concerns to what is being proposed as the next step. If not, and Jason or Chris, please correct me if I'm wrong. We can go with that. Okay. I don't see any hands, so I think with that, Jason, if you've got the well, and Paul, if you've got the direction you need, I think we're good to go.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. We'll bring it again. The initial discussions I'd had with Brandon were, maybe kind of do a similar introduction to the topic for the SSC, maybe in March, and agendas are still in development, and then kind of get some kind of more conclusion at maybe the May meeting or something like that. But we'll proceed along these general lines. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate that discussion. Move on to our next agenda item. And Jason, I believe we're staying with you. I'm having a heck of a time. There we go. Okay, so this will be an update on the New England Council Planning.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Either I've been involved in a few of these or just at New England Council meetings. There are two things that seemed that warranted a little deeper dive. New England Fishery Management Council is working on an update to their risk policy and also for a strategic planning process. So Jonathan Peros, I think, is a good contact information if people want new information. The New England staff would have presented this, but they were having an off-site all-day staff meeting today for kind of just internal organization stuff, so they weren't available, but it's kind enough to put together this overview presentation. And again, so comments, if they're kind of detailed questions, may just have to note them down and follow up, but at least give folks a sense of what's going on. So the risk policy, going to go through what New England's doing for 26, and then the strategic plan. Again, they had a workshop recently, review that a little bit, and again, likewise, kind of continued development and implementation in 2026. No action by the mid required here. Is just more informational. So first, the risk policy. So they kind of have like a phased implementation here, that they had a new risk policy that became effective for 2025, and they have kind of like an initial alpha phase where they have this risk policy matrix of things they're considering and some kind of qualitative application of it. And then the beta phase, the second phase that they're kind of working on right now, is essentially to like take these factors, have their plan development teams, which are like our monitoring committees, assign some values, and the council create a weightings system for what's more or less important, and then quantitative application that drives their ABCs that they set up later in this year for specs for 2027 plus. So again, you'd have like the scoring based on a bunch of factors, and that's scored by their PDTs, their plan development teams. The council sets the weightings. That creates a level of risk that so it's kind of like our risk policy, but more complicated. So these are the factors that they're proposing to use. And so biomass stock status, recruitment, they did have like an assessment type or uncertainty one that they're gonna maybe not do this year, but maybe revisit. A climate vulnerability factor, a fish condition factor. Again, they're not quite ready to implement this, but revisit it. And then a scoring for some commercial and recreational fishery, kind of economic and community importance. So these would be the factors. And the factors would be, again, rated by the PDTs. So they're trying to incorporate kind of more criteria, what drives their ABCs, and looking at stock status, climate impact, socioeconomic impact. So you could have ABCs that are either closer to the OFL or further from the OFL, depending on the scorings and the weightings. And so they've got University of Maine is doing some simulation work to kind of see how these work out. So it's kind of like a work in progress to move from this kind of qualitative use of this matrix system and these factors to like a quantitative, crank it out. Here's what's gonna, again, with the MIDS risk policy, it's like if you're at 75% of your target, you're not at your target, you're going to be a little more cautionary, bigger scientific uncertainty buffer. Here it's going to be like if this overall risk factor is better or worse, going to have a similar sliding scale of tolerance for overfishing. So they have RPWG, the Risk Policy Working Group, and the SSC and the council is meeting, try to revise the factors, the weightings. They're going to do a weightings exercise in June and hopefully use it later this year for setting specifications. So, I'm not going to go through like every one of these factors, but and all the details as they kind of went through at their last council meeting. But so like for biomass stock status here, if it's on the left, well above in the green bottom left there, well above their target, you'd get like a -4 for this particular thing. And if it's overfished, you get a +4. And for all these, the higher, you kind of want like negative scores or better. And so they start to average these out and weight all the different factors. And the lower the number, is kind of going to be like our better stock status, and their higher number is going to kind of be like our poorer stock status, driving more precaution, more buffers, lower ABCs. So again, they have all these sliding scales. Recruitment, again, large multiple year classes on the left, you get a negative score. If you've had a bunch of low recruitment, you have a positive score. The more pluses, 2s, 3s, and 4s, it's going to ultimately drive more precautionary ABCs, lower ABCs. This is the assessment type one. If you don't have as good an assessment type, more buffering. They're not planning on using this for this year. Same with fish condition. Climate vulnerability. So some of them can kind of go either way, but some of them only go one way. And so like climate vulnerability, if there's a negative factor score for this one, it's just going to drive it towards lower risk tolerance, bigger buffers, lower catches. versus like the commercial fishery characterization is one way, but goes the other way. You know, if there's more risk to this, to the commercial fishery or the recreational fishery, then more risk tolerant. So these are the 5 factors. Remember, we went through on this one here. So they're keeping 5 for 26. I'm going to revisit 2. So kind of summary, you can kind of get a sense here of like, if these are more worrisome, you're getting a positive score. If it's more like you can tolerate some risk with stock status, or it may impact the fishery a lot, you're getting these negative scores. And then, so that's going to be this number 2 is the scoring. And then the council is going to, the New England Council is going to do an exercise, I think in June, where they weight those. What's relatively more or less important. And when you combine the weighting and the factor scoring, you're going to get a Z score. I'm not sure, I forget why they call it a Z score, but it's like an overall weighted score. And that's going to kind of drive things. Oh, I thought I had one more. Well, so, you know, the higher the score, if you have a bunch of pluses, it's going to move you out towards the low risk tolerance, lower catches, bigger buffers. And if your weighted Z score is smaller, higher risk tolerance, closer fishing to the OFL. And this is all about like how much do you back off the OFL. So they're like looking at different shapes of the curve and different weighting. So there's, you know, it's a work in progress, but it seems like it has the potential, from my perspective, to kind of have some substantial impacts on their buffering, on their ABCs. So that was just one to. So that's why I was just flagging this is kind of an ongoing process, given potential impacts on the New England Council's ABC setting process. Okay, so that's part A. Again, work in progress. The New England Council will be looking at it at upcoming meetings. You can kind of keep track on their calendar. So that's one thing. The other is their holistic strategic plan update. So like the Mid-Atlantic Council has a strategic plan. It's then kind of binned into strategic goals and strategies to achieve them, and that informs like how you all pick the implementation plan tasks for each year. I think this is kind of moving in that direction. They had a consulting group, the Parning Group, did like a kind of like a gap analysis and trying to figure out how they can try to improve efficiency, improve decision making. And Mary is involved on that project oversight team. May have some additional thoughts on this. I'm not at the end. If so Mary, since you've been, like, I was at their workshop, but Mary may have another perspective, can chime in later also. So again, they're trying to improve their process, trying to be more responsive, both short and long term. So they had a workshop up in Boston that was council members, some key staff, some external facilitators. They reviewed kind of the discovery and gap analysis that the Parning Group had presented last year. And so they have some new draft kind of mission, vision statements. The mission statement was just tweaked a little bit. They added, I think the initial one was just the first part before bold, and they just added kind of the bolding, which I think is just coming from Magnuson Act language there. So then they kind of came up with like a 2-part vision. One is kind of focused on more on council operations. That's like the council vision statement, and then a fisheries vision statement that's kind of more focused on, again, so it's more like a process council side and then a fisheries side. And then they kind of built these draft strategic goals of kind of how they're going to go about trying to achieve their vision. And what they came up with kind of this workshop was focusing on flexibility, capacity and efficiency, partnerships, and data-driven decisions. And cooperative research definitely kind of was like an overall theme, especially on the data-driven decision part and partnerships part, of trying to figure out new ways to get new data streams, and working with industry. So so they just kind of reviewed that kind of this output from that workshop in Boston. And so their timeline for kind of implementing this is, again, they had some comments at their council meeting. The partnering group is going to bring a final project report to New England in April. And then they're going to review and approve the strategic plan, I think by their June meeting. And so there's opportunities for some public comment at these council meetings. And then for the last half of the year, try to use their strategic plan to inform kind of their ongoing activities, and kind of what they're doing in 2027 and beyond. So again, this is kind of two kind of big efforts of the New England Council that thought might be useful to flag and track. And I think I was at the Boston workshop, and I think it's an ambitious timeline. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and then how it informs kind of their kind of taskings for 2027 and beyond of kind of implementing it. So that was all I had on those two topics. And again, if I can, I can try to answer questions, or it may just kind of note them for follow-up for New England staff. And that's it for me on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate that, and for you pinch hitting. And with that in mind, I will look to council members if they have any burning questions. But I do want to note that since we are meeting jointly at 1:30 with the commission, I'd like to stay on track with that time as much as possible. So I would say that if members of the public have any questions, to please direct them to New England Council staff, and we can certainly help connect you if you missed that information. But are there any council members that have questions for Jason? Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not trying to keep anybody from lunch, but just really quick. I'm curious to know if, just with the risk policy, if there have been any members of the Mid-Atlantic Council SSC that have been, I guess, paying attention to the efforts of that work group, giving sort of the scoring rubric.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Brandon or Paul might have more perspective on that, but if they don't, I'll dig around and find out.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any direct involvement. Thanks. Perhaps Brandon.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any direct involvement. I know there are New England SSC members that are on the work group for the risk policy, but I don't know of any of our SSC members that are tracking it, and they're certainly not specifically engaged in the process.
Okay, thank you very much. And scrolling through here, I don't see any more hands. So with that, we can break for lunch. We'll, if we can, I think we're close enough to the hour. If we can come back, we'll start right around 1. I might give us a few extra minutes to make that up. And we're going to be turning it over to John Almeida when we come back for the legal review, financial disclosure, and recusal training. After that, as I mentioned, we'll be getting some important recreational fisheries updates, and we'll be meeting with the ASMC Policy Board. So thank you everyone so far for a great morning, and we'll be back at 1.